Welcome to today's Conversations with Authors brought to you by the Indiana IEP Resource Center. My name is Marcy Wilburn, and I am the project coordinator of the center. Today, we welcome Dominique Smith, co-author of Removing Labels, 40 Techniques to Disrupt Negative Expectations About Students and Schools. Let's start with some logistics today. Please know that we are in the platform of Zoom webinar, and all cameras and mics are disabled for participants today. However, we still want you to be able to pose questions throughout this session, so please do so one of two ways. One, you're able to go ahead and enter those questions directly into the chat. The other option is to go ahead and enter them into the Q&A. When you enter into the chat, there is a drop-down menu that either says host and panelists or all attendees. If you want to speak to everyone, please go ahead and submit all attendees so everyone can see your comments. The Q&A is just seen by the panelist or the presenter today. So that's the difference between the two. But in order to access those, you'll see the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. You will click on chat or Q&A, type in your message, and click submit. We do have closed captions today. So you will notice if that's your preferred method to receive information, you can click in the bottom toolbar and find the closed captioning button to enable those for you today as well. One lucky winner at the end of today's session will receive a copy of Dominique's book, Removing Labels. So we will select that, and I will put that in the chat at the end so that you have that information as well. Please pose questions anytime throughout the session, and Dominique is willing to answer those as he's presenting the information today. At this time, I will pass it over to Dominique. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm always excited. It's bright and early. I'm in San Diego, so got the morning over here. If you don't know, I'm a principal. I love what I do. I was having the conversation earlier. I got into our school today. There was a student waiting for me. He's a huge Braves fan. I don't even like the Dodgers, but he wanted to go back and forth. So we had a lot of fun before I got on here. So I love what I do. I've been in my school for 14 years. I never want to leave. They got to throw me out. But this is what I believe in. This is what I do. I focus a lot around equity and the components around equity and how the inequities creates these labels of individuals. So that's what we're going to kind of go through today. My email is down at the bottom. If you have any questions ever, please email me. And if you want to have some fun and follow along with me, let's get on Twitter as well. But I always start here with a couple phrases. And first and foremost is my daughter, and it's pride and joy of my life. And she holds a beautiful sign that says, "You are beautiful." Now, when my daughter's here, you might see her again in our presentation. Fun fact, I have 3 children, but this one's my favorite, so I get to put her up the most, right? Just kidding. I love them all. But the sign is where I want to kind of bring our attention. If you look at schools right now, we look into where we're walking into our building. How often do students feel seen? How often can students go and feel unseen and not connected to the organization, to the school, to the individuals within it? And what I've realized over the years is our students, our families, our community in general, and our parents walk into our buildings not feeling really good based on the experience the night before, based on their life experience, based on the morning of. And some of our students forget that they are beautiful. And some of our families forget that school isn't a bad place, and it's a beautiful place that allows you to be beautiful. So if you come to my school, and I hope you will, you'll see that we've themed our building. It says, "You are beautiful." It has signs everywhere that says, "You matter." It has signs all over says, "You are enough," and we are family. Because that's the message we want our students to see. We did, as we talk about removing labels, and we're trying to figure out where to be with our students, we walked with students that have struggled in our building and said, where would you hide? Where would you get away? Where are the dark corners that we wouldn't think about? And as we walked with students, we started to theme those areas with positive messages. So anytime a student was struggling, they would always see something positive. The other side is I want to make sure that we always have a time, and that's why the chat box is here and questions and answers, that we can share our own ideas and share our thinking. Each one of us has an experience and a lived experience that we should be able to share with each other. Education needs to do better with this, that we share ideas and we become great together rather than siloed away from each other. So please share your thinking on anything that you are doing, want to do, or have tried and said, hey, maybe not do that ever again. But if you haven't today, I encourage you to either find somebody in your building, find a loved one, or look yourself in the mirror and just say, You are beautiful because you deserve that right. And so does every other individual. The other statement that I like to start off with is a couple of years ago, Brad Pitt got an award. And at the end of his speech, it says, if you get a chance to be kind to someone tomorrow, take it. I think we need it. And right now, in the world that we live in and the experiences that we've had, especially with education, please, please bring kindness to every situation. And when we think about removing labels, labels does not bring kindness. Labels do not allow kindness to live. And so as we go through some of the techniques, very few of them, we're going to talk about what we can do to bring kindness in everything we do. So the big question to you, and you always have to remind yourself, and if you want to participate and throw it into a chat, or if you just kind of want to write it somewhere else, my question to you is, why did you become an educator? I think when you know your why, and when your why flickers daily, it helps anything that we're talking about. So when I think about removing labels, when I start to think about the individuals that I serve, I know my why. And my why pushes me to do better. My why tells me what can I do better. So when I think of my why, I think of the students I serve. As I look at this photo, this is my most prized possession in my educational career. I've been able to travel. I've been able to get awards. I've wrote books, all of that. But when I look at this photo, it reminds me every day of what my why is. And when I look at this photo, I watched a bunch of students be able to graduate high school. And that makes me feel really, really good. The other thing, though, is I understand that each one of these students had a label placed on them prior to this. And now when we think about labels and we talk about removing labels, I know it's easily to be dragged into and have the conversation around students with disabilities. And we're going to get there. But the other component too is every individual gets labels, and how does that label affect their life, affect their learning, affect how they're handled in the discipline approaches that happen as well. So when I look at my students here, I realize one thing, and I hope that all of you realize this too, is students make mistakes. And I say that because all students make mistakes, but where is the adult after they make the mistake? And that's my why. I want to be the adult that doesn't leave. I want to know that I can be there for my students when they make a poor choice and say, man, I'm frustrated, I'm hurt, I'm disappointed, but what are we going to do tomorrow? And that's where I live, because I know tomorrow can be different. So why not get another chance, a second, third, fourth, fifth chance, and remove the label that might come on that? I know that some of my students that worked and came to my school and worked hard at other places, I don't know if they would have graduated because the label would have became too large on them. So my why, be the adult that never leaves. My other why, like I was saying earlier, I have 3 beautiful children. And I want and need to change education for them. And when I work and I look at my children, and I say, when I drop them off, I'm hoping the adult in front of them treats them like they're their own. Because I know when we believe that the child in front of us is our own, we have higher expectations. We don't lower the expectations. We find the supports to reach the expectations. And guess what? If we do say something negative in the day because we are frustrated, we usually own it. If I get frustrated with my son, I might not say the choice words that I'm thinking about ever. But what I can do at the end of the day is say, my bad. Shouldn't have said that. That's dad's fault. I'm sorry. I love you. What can I do? And we take ownership a little bit easier with our own children, but we say some things to students that aren't really that nice either. So what can we do to shift that thinking as well? I also look at my children and I realize life is different than what life is for me. And I realize that I have to teach teachers that as you have minimal instructional minutes, please take time to focus on the whole child. Don't label defiant. Don't label disrespectful. Don't label unengaged, right? Because maybe we don't know who the student is. My son's going to be a fabulous student in your classroom, but there are days he's going to struggle. Why? Because he's in a split household. And there's days that he misses mom. And there's days that he misses dad. And maybe he doesn't know how to handle those emotions right there. And he might check out. Figure out what's going on before we put any label on him too. My little princess in the pink dress, Emma Kay, she's going to bring some spunk to the table. And before you label anything like that, figure out who she is and how does she learn. And she has an IEP. And what does that IEP mean to her? And how does that separate? What does that mean? I don't put the IEP on top of her name and all of a sudden treat her differently, because that label creates what we're trying to get rid of. So when I think about that, big from the queen herself, we always say young people do not learn from old people they don't like. So relationships matter and that connection matters. And we have to have that connection to be able to grow with our students. And when I think of removing labels and where we were at, we had a former student, his name's Giovanni, and we were talking about writing the Removing Labels book. And he said, "Can I write you a poem?" I said, "Absolutely." And if you get the book, or if you look at the book, this is the poem that he wrote. And why I like it is because sometimes students do not realize how the labels have impacted their life. And we have to allow them to have that opportunity to say, what is a label? How has that impacted you? How do you want those to be removed from you? So I just put this in here. Of course, I can send it out to any of you that are searching for the poem. I think it's a great close read for students to be able to dive in and say, what does it truly mean? But where I want to kind of go is where I started my conversation and one of the fights I live for. And I don't think we can talk about removing labels if we don't have the conversation of what does equity mean. I know equity is a scary word for some individuals. I know there's a lot of conversation around the states of what does equity mean. And I'm saying, what are we talking about in access? What are we talking about individuals? And how do we fight for what is right for the individuals in front of us? So a couple of things that I always live by is you can't teach what you don't know, and you can't lead where you won't go. I want to dive into the harder conversations. I want to have the beautiful conversations. I want to make sure I can look at data and dream big and say, what can we do different tomorrow? We see what we see in education. We see what the data points say. We say we're going to make change, but are we really? And so what we can do is dream big. We can start to do things differently. We could celebrate the diversity rather than make it feel like a mandate, like, oh my goodness, look at this. I have X, Y, and Z, and we have to get more X, Y, and Z. No. Or we silo, diversity, or we use them as data points. No, it's celebration of the individuals that walk into our doors and how diversity changes the culture and climate and how we connect. So celebrating all of that, and then understanding during this journey, and when we have hard conversations, there are going to be roadblocks for students that we have to support. But at the same time, we're going to have massive roadblocks for adults. And what does that mean? And how do we help get through those roadblocks? And why are roadblocks there? And having the real conversations with each other so we can grow and support our students, because some of our roadblocks start to transfer into the labels we place on students. So when we think about that, our big conversation should always be focused around our why. Why are we doing this? Why do we believe in this? Why are we focusing on it? When I look at my why, and when I start to think of the central question of why here, why removing labels? Why equity? Why restorative practices and what I believe in? And start to focus and have the conversation with all stakeholders of our why before we ever rush to our how. So I think that's where sometimes education is fun to do, but we rush a lot to the how. Here's a speaker, professional development, a book, as that's what I'm doing right now. But I'm hoping we have the why and the background behind it, because we have to get comfortable with this. Understanding quality is not equity. Now, quality is needed. Equality is a beautiful thing in this world. I have two beautiful girls that I'll fight for equality. Equality will help breed into equity, but equity is different. And we have to have a good fight for equity and what we are trying to create within our schools. And when I think of equity, I have watched schools build teams. I have watched schools write their equity plan or their ESSA plans. I have seen them say, we are an equitable school. And I walk into their campus and they say, we fight for equity. And this is the photo we have in all our rooms because equity is a must. And you know what? I got trapped in this too. I thought this was the right photo. When I first started this journey of equity, I would put this up every once in a while. And I was like, I'm going to talk about equity. But when you really look at this photo, this is not an equitable opportunity. This photo still has a barrier. This photo still has individuals of color saying, no, you're not welcome. This photo is saying you can't have a good seat in within the game. And the photo is always this representation of the boxes equal more rather than what is right. And so if we've used this photo before, there's nothing wrong. We just didn't have the right one at the time. So we're going to get rid of this photo and we're going to jump over and we find this one. And I fell in love with this one because what was there was apples. Apples was that tangible thing I could grab if equity lived. And I got really into this one because I was like, yes, the apple can be whatever we want to call it. And when we have equity, we'll get it. And so we hung apples in my building. We started putting apples everywhere. And all of a sudden, apples fall. It just didn't work. But again, when you start to look at this photo, we started to see that the boxes came back in. And the boxes represented more rather than what's right. And all of a sudden, we got back into this world of we need to figure out what equity truly is. And equity is figuring out what's right for the individual. And so I came back to this photo because there was a new add-on. And what I loved about this is the real conversation. When we fight for equity, when we find resources, money, funding, supports, does it go to the individuals that deserve it, that need it, that could benefit from it? Or does some of that stuff go to the students that are thriving, that can push up our test scores, that can make our school look really nice? And do we see that gap? I feel like some of you experienced this. The inequities for special education, where did we see some of that happen? And the gaps that we start to see and the discrediting that we start to see. So what we have to figure out is what is equality and what is equity and what's the difference. And this photo is a photo I can use with my families. This is the photo I can use with my students. This is a photo that I can use with my colleagues. Equality is I can give everybody the same. And what that will do is allow individuals not to say, that's not fair. But when I think about that, I love the statement, that's not fair. So if someone says to me, that's not fair, I say, great, because we need to teach. Because we don't need a fair landscape across an education. We need to figure out what's right for the individual so that they are supported. Because when you think about this, it's multiple components of what equity and equality does within the classrooms. First and foremost, the education system of the content in the classroom, is it equitable? And have we seen that all of a sudden a teacher walks in and says, hey, welcome to my class. This is what you're going to learn based on what I want to teach. This is the way you're going to learn it because this is how I've taught it for the last 10 years. And these are the rules you're going to follow. And all of a sudden, there are students that aren't getting the resources that they deserve. They aren't being successful because there's only one way we give content. And so when I think about that, I think we're trying to shift that. I think we're trying to figure out the diverse learners that we have in our classroom. I think we are trying to find the mesh and try to match how to support and scaffold and figure out what's the best learning for every individual. But at the same time, I don't think we're all the way there. The bigger issue, obviously, I hope you agree with me, is when it comes to our discipline. We know for a fact right now in every state, students of color and students with disabilities are going to be suspended at a higher rate or removed from classrooms at a higher rate, where the learning outside of class learning is happening, right? We're over here learning. We are no more in class. And so what can we do to shift that thinking? Because when that happens, there's an inequity happening because students are being pushed away at different rates, and that should never, ever happen. And what I've tried to do when I push every single day in any conversation you ever have with me, I want to get out of the black and white book. I want to live in the gray. I want to know the story behind the individual. I want to know what's best for them. I want to know what the learning is. I want to understand, hey, if I send you home, will you actually go home and have someone at your house to go through and process all the things that you probably did wrong that were deemed wrong by the school and make an actionable plan to make change? Or do you go home to an empty house where no one's there to support you? That no one's there to have a conversation with you, that no one's allowing you to be able to go through this social emotional growth. And if there isn't, I don't want to send you there anymore. People get kind of frustrated with me, but I don't want to do that. So we fight for equity. And when we fight for equity, it can start to shift into figuring out where the minor inequities are at and how we get rid of some of those before they become massive inequities. So when I look at this and I think about some of the minor inequities that happen and some of the things that happen, I think just within society that we don't step up to and we don't stop, is a couple things such as language that we use and phrases that we haven't said no more. And one of that is, I don't see color. And I put this in here because I say to anybody that says, I don't see color, I say, I'm sorry, but you do. And when you say, I don't see color, what you are saying and what you are doing is you're eliminating the human being in front of you, their lived experiences, their culture, the fight they've had to go through for generations. Because when I go to your school and somebody says, I don't see color, but then I say, can we look at some of your data points? Guess what? Your data points scream color, because that's how it's been broken down for years. So we absolutely do. And I believe it's on us to start to take the next step of saying, hey, you do, please do not say I don't anymore. The other big one, and I hope, and I think I have some of you on the same team with me here, I fight for inclusion. And I want students to be able to learn from other students. I want student A to learn from student B, and student B to learn from student A. And I want students to have that experience in the classroom. Now, some of our schools aren't fully inclusive. Some of our schools, we're still, getting our students into general ed classrooms. Great. I fight for the inclusion part. But what happens when a student comes in, right? A student with disability comes into a classroom. Are they celebrated? Are they told, welcome to our classroom? Maybe in the very beginning. But what happens if that student does not do well? Who takes it on? If a student struggles in a classroom, does the teacher say, oh, my student is struggling, let me find the resource, let me try to find the help, let me see what I can do differently? Or do we see when a student with a disability starts to struggle, the teacher all of a sudden says, that's not my student, and their case manager, or their specialist, or the person that's working with them over there, you need to work with your student because they're not doing well in my class. If they're in your class, they are your student. And we have to change that language. And what we have to do is we have to change the language and change the experiences that some well-meaning adults create when it comes to special education. And the labels that are easily placed on students with disabilities, we have to get rid of that as fast as we can. Because I finally saw it and felt it more than ever during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I had to go down to the district office to pick my children's packets up. And when I went down to the district office, and a district that I know, a district that I love, and people that I know and care about as well. And I got down to the district office and I saw the learning boxes. And so I went and picked up my son's first. He was in 6th grade at the time. So you go to the 6th grade box, you kind of scroll through, you find your child's name, its first name, last initial. You take home their packet so they can learn at home during the pandemic. So as I picked my sons up, I was going to find my daughters, and I was told that my daughters would be there too. But when I was looking, I was like looking around, and I'm like, I don't see her packet. I don't see her box actually. And I called my wife and I was like, hey, I'm down here. Do you know where Emma K's box is? And she said, yeah, I do. It's the special ed box. And in that moment in time, my anger, my sadness, my frustration hit an all-time high. Because I walked up to a box, and this was what I saw. I saw my little princess. I saw my little daughter not being able to be herself. There was a label placed on her. She didn't have any of her rights. And I saw a bunch of other students not having that either. And all of a sudden I realized, I said, what do we have here? I have all these boxes over here of grade levels. But my daughter's over here. No, put her in her grade level, because special education is a service, not a grade level. I took my daughter out, her name out of that box, and I knew other families had been there before me. And I knew other families were coming after me, and my heart ached for them because they did not know that this was not okay. And I took every other child's name out of that box and put them back into the grade level they deserve to be in, because we have to make changes. And it was right there where I realized that labels can happen and labels can be created by well-meaning adults. I don't think anybody came out here and said, I'm going to be mean and hurtful and, try to frustrate parents. They were trying to make it easy to find the box, but that was just absolutely wrong. So we have to change it, and we have to make a change immediately. When I think of that too, I wanted to make sure, again, this students are disciplined, suspended, expelled different rates, and we should not feel comfortable with that, because when students are, guess what? That invisible label comes on them. I'm the kid that's always suspended. I'm the kid that's always out of class. I'm the kid that's always in the principal's office, and they walk around all the time feeling that. And so when we think about that, we know every student searches for the sense of belonging. So what are we doing within our school buildings to create that? What can we do every day to build that sense of belonging? And what are we doing to eliminate it? And we have to be intentional on this and say, what are we doing to eliminate the sense of belonging? And what can I refix, rebuild to make sure I'm always having that sense of belonging? So when I look at that and I start to see that, one of the things that I understand and know is that language can build identity. And what language are we using with our students? What do we say to our students, about our students, around our students? Because the language we use builds up our individual identity. And that identity then starts to change. And when our identity shifts, so does our agency. That agency component of saying who I am and what I can actually do. I start to shift my thinking of what I can do and change the language of who I really am. And what we see now, our labels are being placed on students all the time. If you want to go hear a label about a student, go to a teacher lounge, as there's plenty of teacher lounges that are really great and really beautiful and people are having wonderful conversations. There have also been some real negative ones. And all of a sudden, what we start to see is that there's these labels that are placed on students, and then those labels become almost how we interact with them and what we think about that student. And we work with the label rather than with the human. We act towards the label, discipline talk, work with the label rather than trying to figure again who that student is. And as you look down that list, how many of those words you don't love? Which ones do not sit well with you? And I want you to think about that as like, how and when do these happen? And how do I eliminate some of those languages being used and some of those labels that are being placed on our students? Because when I look at it, and when I look at the John Hattie research, and if with a little background, I think most of us know, but that massive research study of the meta-analysis and looking at over 300 effect sizes of what has potential of growth for students, not labeling students, just not labeling students. Guess what? That's at a 0.61. We're having hopefully that potential of above average supports for students, and we can get learning happening. So when we think about that, we have to change some of the things that will happen within our schools. And I want you to think, how many times have teachers been wrong on what they've said about students? And how they've said things about students that have created labels about students that have created this false identity and agency for students, but been absolutely wrong. So I think this guy. I think it might have been wrong. I'll give you another one. I think that one might be off. And one more. I'm glad she didn't. But again, what label probably came with that? Got another one? The things we say, the language we're using, the identities and agencies we build of students. How adults can build that, create it, and break it down. Another one. And one more. So as we think about that, how often have we been wrong? How often have we maybe missed on this? And so when we think about that, what are our expectations for students? And I want you to think, did our expectations change? And are they different? And have we seen this? because our expectations are influenced, right? And how do we make sure that we don't change all these expectations for different students in our classroom? I hope we have high expectations for all students and none of those differ. But can I know who the individuals are in my classroom? Because if I know who they are, I can build the supports into it to make sure they reach the high expectations. So when you think about that too, I want you to think about this number, 85%. 85%. As you're sitting there, I want you to think, I wonder what he's going with. What does the 85 mean? Where do we think it's going to go? 85% of responses from teachers when asked why the classroom is struggling or why we saw the dip in scores or why we see that students aren't doing work, 85% of the responses are based on the student's behaviors. I have a bunch of students that never pay attention. Of course, you're going to see a dip. Of course, you're going to see a rough classroom. Of course, we're not going to be as successful. Or, hey, you know what? Have you been in my classroom? I have a lot of the English learners. We have a new year of new students that have English learner needs, and so I can't be successful. Or, and you know what? I actually have a lot of students that their home life is actually not very good. So when I ask them to do homework and they go home, they don't really do it. So they can't be prepared for my class. So that's not on me. It's actually on my students. So if they were prepared, they'd be more successful because I keep giving them so much homework, but they never do it. And you know what? Actually, if you really want to get down into it, I have a bunch of students that are being assessed and they should be assessed because I believe there's something wrong with them. And when we figure out what's wrong with them, we're going to be able to figure out how to make my classroom better. 85%. It is too easy to blame the student rather than that 15% response of like, maybe I didn't do it as great as I could. Maybe students didn't know what they were supposed to be learning in my classroom today. Maybe I didn't support all learners in my classroom today. I could have done something different. Maybe I can look at tier 1 interventions as, oh my goodness, maybe I wasn't the best teacher today. And what could I have done differently? Holding ourselves accountable before we jump to a tier 2 and push people away. What am I doing? What can I do? And our tier 2, tier 3 interventions are not special education. We got to figure out what are we doing for our students. But too often we blame the students before we get there. So what can we do? What are the things that we can change? Number one, and when we think about where we can go, we have a couple broken down into the book. We have our individual, we have our classroom, then we have our whole school-wide approaches. So I'll give you a couple here of what we can do. Number one, we think about individual approaches is know the individuals in front of you. So I'll bring my little island queen back in here and I give you her name. Her name is Emma K. Noel Smith. And I give you a little bit of background because I think names are extremely important. Names are fun. So my daughter got her name because my grandmother's middle name was Emma. And when she passed away, I said, if I ever have a daughter, I would name her Emma somehow, some way. The K comes because my mom's name starts with K. My sister's name starts with K. And my wife's sister's name starts with K. 3 women that would have an impact on my daughter's life. We wanted that all mixed with my grandmother's name. So that's how Emma K was created. Now, the fun fact is there was a couple of these trainings when my daughter was first born. I was really excited about her name and I put it up and a couple people, I kid you not, raised their hand and said, did you know you spelled your daughter's name wrong? And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, just want to let you know if you want it to be Emma K, it's supposed to be a Y at the end, not an E. And I would just kind of laugh and they'd be like, okay, well, no, but let me tell you how she got the E. The E is from my dad. My dad was born on the island of Fiji, and from Fiji went to Hawaii to San Diego. And he's always told me to be proud to be Polynesian. And so when I had my daughter, I wanted to like give her this beautiful islander name. So I talked to my aunties and I was like, hey, you know, what should I do? And I got all these great stories of, you know, of the grassroots of who we are, from the whales to the sharks. You know, even my auntie was like, look at Moana, watch Moana a couple of times. We even got into, you know, where do we go? And one of my aunties was just like, you know what? Just add a bunch of A's, E's, I's, O's, and U's, and it will look Islander-ish. And I said, best advice ever, we're getting an E. And that is how she got Emma K. Noelle was supposed to be born on Christmas, but that didn't happen. But I'd already painted signs, hung up signs, made a room look really nice. So we weren't going to rechange all that. But I want you to think about your name. I want you to think about your students' names. Have or do you have a name that has been said wrong? Have you experienced times when people say your name wrong? My name is Dominique. A lot of people don't know it's Dominique. If they see me, right, and they see my name's Dominique, but you see my face, there's a high chance you might have shifted my name to Dominic, because Dominic is the boys' version. And I've experienced it for a very long time. A lot of people think that I'm a girl. They see Dominique Smith and they're like, I wonder what she's talking about. I mean, till today, I have people write me emails. Dear Miss Smith, will you present at our school? I'm like, no, thank you. But what I realized forever was that when you say a student's name wrong, you are eliminating that sense of belonging. I had teachers when I was younger that would never call me Dominique. They only called me Dominic, or shortened my name without my permission to Dom. And when I watched classroom, I would watch a teacher say 25, 35 names correctly and never say mine correctly. And the only thing I could think about is, you don't know me, you don't care about me, you don't love me, any of those factors. And so when I look at that, I think about our students right now. How many students are going through this experience every single day? How many students walk into a classroom and their teacher in front of them says their name wrong? This is the first label that happens. We put a label because we pretend like we know the individual. We say their name wrong, and all of a sudden, who are they? And when you think about that experience that student lives. Also think about it if you've ever been with a peer and they got their roster and they saw Malik, Brittany, Josue, George, Jesse, Grecia, and think, did that individual already have an image of who that student was? And if they had the image of who that student was, did they already add characteristics who that individual was? And how that creates a label, that creates an inequity for that individual. I have students all the time tell me, I wish I could change my name. And I ask them why, and we go through that process and we start to have those conversations. But students and their experiences of who they are. I have students all the time say, I wish my name was different, so my teachers would ask me who I am before they ask me if I speak English. I wish my name was different because then maybe my experience would be different when I go into the learning environment of my classroom, because you never see anybody like me. You never hear anybody like me. And the only time you do hear about me is in a negative light based on just a name. So I ask you, do we change our students' names? Do we have students from different countries coming to our schools with a beautiful culture, a beautiful history, and a beautiful lived experience, but because we can't pronounce their name correctly, we change it, we shorten it, we don't even figure out who it is? I ask you to know, I ask you to push, I ask you to think, how can I work to make sure I know all students' names? Because it truly does make an impact. When we talk about it, we know this. Our buddy Russ, he did the student voice data. That's the like healthy survey that I use here at my school. And in his survey, only 52% of students nationally said that teachers even knew their name. And if you asked if they could pronounce it correctly, it goes down even lower. So what do we do? What do we do today? What do we do tomorrow? We have to start making sure that everybody knows names are important. And it feels good to hear your name within the school. So I was thinking about this and I was like, how do I make sure that everybody understands this? And I was like, oh my goodness, we already know this because we used to sing a song and the song used to tell us it feels good to go somewhere where everybody knows your name. So, excuse me, I have a song for you that I'm hoping wherever you are at, you will sing aloud, because we are reclaiming this, because this is our song back in education.
Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You wanna be where you can see the troubles are all the same. You wanna be where everybody knows your name.
Doesn't that sound great? Going to a place where everybody knows your names. When we think about removing labels, guess what? If we know who the people are within our building, we remove some of those labels. Getting students to be able to walk through their campus and know at least 1, 2, maybe even 3 adults are going to say hello to them and say their name because they know who they are. And what's the other part of that song? You want to go where everybody is excited that you showed up, right? That they're excited that you came. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we looking at the places that create the moments of saying, don't really like you, or, oh, hey, I'm not really connecting with you. And I want you to think about this. Think about the labels that are placed on individuals that have certain situations. Number 1, think of your tardy system line. Is that a good experience for students? Probably not. Think of a student that shows up late. What is their experience like? They walk in, they already know they're late. They walk up to the front desk, they get their tardy slip, they start to fill it out, and the grown adult says, you're late. And they say, I know. And they get their tardy slip and they walk up to their class and they go in the classroom and they have to hand it to the teacher in front of all their peers. And teacher goes, you're late. And they say, I know, thank you so much. I'm going to check out now for the rest of the day because I feel embarrassed. I don't feel great. I have a label placed on me that I'm always the late kid. But guess what? I live outside. I live farther than others. My bus route's the longest. I miss the bus. My mom drives me to school, but on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, she drops off my little brother first. My mom loves Starbucks, so she has to get Starbucks. I get picked up by grandma, whatever it may be. We have to make sure we don't allow things like that to happen to our students. So what we're trying to do is, we know, especially during the pandemic, students try to hide, students try to not feel seen because they were trying to fade away. What we knew right then and there is, even if a screen was off, if I said your name, it still told you, I know you're here and I see you and I care about you. So our new thinking and our new focus is every student's name during every meeting. That was virtual. It's transferred into our classrooms now. Every student's name, every period, every day. We're going to be able to go see some students and give them a pat on the shoulder, look them in the eye, or give them a handshake. Sometimes we don't hit every student. So making sure we say every student's name, every period, every single day. Another big one that we use to remove labels is get to know who the individual is. When you think about getting to know an individual, there's some individuals that have already had a label placed on them. Oh, that kid's really hard to get to. That's a hard to teach, hard to reach kid. Oh, that kid never wants to talk to anybody. There's all these labels placed on this individual, oh, they can't communicate. They don't want to communicate, whatever it may be. So we ask you to break it down. There's a lot of research on the 2x10 approach. Take 2 minutes a day for 10 days in a row. Go and connect with that student. Don't talk about work. Don't talk about school. Just start to have conversation with that individual. And you do it every single day for 10 days in a row. And the research tells us that that student will start to shift. That student will start to open up. That student will start to connect. And all of a sudden, you get to know who that person is rather than that little label that we placed on them. So using the 2x10 approach, some of you might have already been doing that, but how can we create that as best as we can? Another huge component too is making sure that we help students label their emotions. Students get in trouble and students get labels placed on them because they are reacting or acting because of the emotions that they're feeling. And they have never been told it's okay to have emotion. It's okay to understand your emotion. And it's okay to build actionable plans when you are feeling your emotions or your triggers. So making sure that we have the conversation of where are your emotions. This is why the movie, what is it? I want to say Inside Out. Yeah, no, it's not it. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the movie. With all the little guys in the head, right? Yeah, I was right. Inside Out. There we go. Great. I was a little nervous. I was wrong. But thinking about that, as we had students, we could say, what is the emotion that you're feeling? Label it. And then why is it there? Because what happens, right? Student has an emotion, their own reaction or their own coping skill is this is what happens based on their experiencing the emotion. And what do? We label the behavior. That behavior label becomes the student label, and all of a sudden that's who that kid is. You come to the classroom, oh, that's a kid that he's a biter or throws chairs or he struggles with it. We put all these other things in front of who the student is and how to support the student. So we think about that. The other one that I love here is the pictorial, because you can tell a student, how are you feeling? They might not be able to label it with the word. Show me on this. Where do you sit? What are you feeling? So making sure we kind of have that component as we move forward. Some of our classroom approaches, as I'm just giving you a couple out there and seeing where we're at, is number one, invest in your school climate. What does it feel like in your classroom? Do I feel welcomed in your classroom? Do I feel like I'm a part of your classroom? How I, as the adult, invest into the climate to make sure every student has that feeling of that support, that connection, and making sure that they know that they're seen and loved. So when I think about that, we have to build up on our relationships. We have to make sure that we have positive regard for all of our students, that we make sure that we don't put anything on anybody before we even get to know who they are. Oh no, my computer kind of froze. Hold on. Oh, look, there we go. Oh no, we did a little fast. So like I was saying, making sure that we have all that support and that emotional support for every student. But this is where I think labels happen the most, when it comes to behavior. And what I see too often are public humiliation, moments of public humiliation. What do I mean by that? I see clip charts everywhere, and I see students being destroyed by clip charts everywhere. This tool to help behavior destroys who the human being is, because the accountability that we are trying to create is washed when we make a student feel embarrassed in front of peers. So if you're sitting here and you're like, I don't know what it is, or maybe you're like, hey, I do know what it is, but I'm in high school, we're going to talk about exactly kind of where this all ties in together. Number one, clip charts are a system for when students come in, they clip in the middle. And if they have a good day, they go up. If they have a bad day, they go down. My son in third grade had this system. And if you had a good day in the classroom, you go up to Sunnyland. If you had a really good day, you go to Rainbow Land. And if you had a poor day, you go to Cloudy Land. If you had a really bad day, you go to Stormy Land. When my son brought this home to me, he said, what do you think? And I said, I don't like it, but that's me. And I'm not calling your teacher out, or calling anybody that uses them out. I just don't think it's a good system. But if that's what your teacher's going to use, we're going to go for Rainbow Days. And so my son did. My son went to school. My son came home. My son was excited. Dad, I had a rainbow day. He'd go to school, come home. We'd be excited. Dad, I had a rainbow day. And I was kind of sitting there like, man, maybe I was wrong on these, because my son's feeling really good. He's getting pumped up. He's getting really excited. We come home again. Dad, guess what? What's up? I had a rainbow day. Awesome. Guess what else, Dad? What else, buddy? Brock, Jeff, Malik, and Brittany all had stormy days. There it is. My son was able to identify who bad kids were in the classroom, because he watched his peers, his friends, walk up to the front of the class and grab their beautiful name and get clipped down into negative areas. They did the walk of shame in front of others because a teacher was frustrated with them, or didn't like what they were doing, or didn't live up to the rules. They said, you go clip down now. Or even to some of our class, write your name on the board or put a check by your name. All of a sudden, all these systems that we have into place that are supposed to change behavior are destroying who the human beings are. This is a classroom where I was walking right before the pandemic and helping, looking at what could we do for culture and climate. This is where a student could land. This is where a student could land. A child that was dropped out by parents that absolutely probably loved them. They could be that. Absolutely not. And where I think this transfer to every grade level is when I look at a clip chart, the bottom of a clip chart always says, call home, parent contact. And when I start to think about that, I start to think of how often I've been called from my son's school. And I think about what was the conversation? And when I start to look at that, guess what? They're not positive. Though all the contact homes, they were never anything good. It was, your son was laughing too much today. Your son was talking too much today. Your son wore a hat in class today. Your son was giggling during reading time today. And I start to think about that. I go back to that idea of the clip chart of that contact home, and I question, why are you calling me? Shouldn't it say rebuild relationship with teacher because the student didn't live up to the expectations of the teacher, didn't live up not to the expectations of me as a parent. They didn't do what you were hoping to do. So you should rebuild that with them and say, here's what I'm feeling. Shouldn't happen. How can we do it? And then call me and say, guess what? I had a really beautiful conversation with your child. They weren't living up to expectations. We had a really good conversation. They took ownership of what they're doing. And this is what we're going to do tomorrow. Maybe you can support that because we already built the plan together over here. But I only get the negatives. So all of a sudden, me and other families now, and you've probably experienced this too, all of a sudden we start to push back a little bit. We start to question, why are you calling me? We start to get frustrated on the calls. We start ignoring your calls because why? Why are you calling me and telling me all these negative things about the best thing I have in my life? When I dropped my kid off in the morning, that was the best child I have. I didn't keep the good one in the car. I gave him my best one. It doesn't feel good to hear negative things about the thing you love the most on the planet. So my son's at K-8 school. Had one call that was a positive. Her name is Miss Meza. And anybody that ever hears me speak, I will give credit to Miss Meza. And I want to say thank you to Miss Meza. Miss Meza called me one day. And I saw the number come across on my phone. And I saw it was a school. And I was like, I'm going to be frustrated today. I know I am. When I answered the phone, she said, hey, Dr. Smith, how you doing? I said, I'm all right, Miss Meza. How are you? She said, I'm doing okay. She said, I wanted to say something to you, Mr. or Dr. Smith, whatever the time it was, right? And she said, I wanted to let you know Nixon scored 100% on his math test today. When I talked to him, he said, you helped him study. I wanted to say thank you for helping him study because Nixon is super excited. I've never seen him this excited about math. Thank you for doing that. And in that moment, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. The only thing that I could get out was, damn right, Miss Meza, I did help him study because I was so excited. I was just like, God, I'm so proud. I'm so thank you for calling me. And guess what? It changed the rest of my day. I was excited. I was going to math classes here in my own school. I was walking in. How can I help you? What do you need? Do you need help with calculus? Good, because I have 5th grade math mastered. Let's go into this. Let's figure it out together, right? I felt good. My son felt good. That connection from school to home created love again back in the building, into my house, because I was so happy. I said to my son, I'm so proud. I love you. We connected deeper because of the school. So I ask you, can we do glows before it grows and stop calling on all the negatives? And that's where it goes from our clip charts to our high school. When do we call on the positives? How do we take a couple of days and say, hey, I have a period on Tuesdays. I'm going to call 3 families. I'm going to send 3 cards home. I'm going to start to spotlight and glow up all of our students because they deserve it. Because if we have the glow ups, guess what? We're going to shift away from all those negative labels that are placed on them and celebrate who they are as an individual and what they have done to create something for themselves. And guess what we're also going to do is I'm going to change what my classroom looks like, because my classroom norms, expectations, and rules are built on what I wanted, not what my students wanted and needed. We start to think about this. All of a sudden we have the rule breaker in my classroom. We have the kid that's defined in my classroom. Well, guess what? They aren't. You created a system without their voice. Student voice is a must. And so we ask you, please, when you are building expectations, norms, promises, or rules, ask your students, what should this learning environment be like? because you have to hold yourself accountable to it as well. And guess what? Students are great at this. They want to be held accountable. They want to have their own rules so they can hold themselves accountable and then look at their friend and say, guess what? We don't do that here. Come on, man. We said we ain't going to do that over here anymore. And I'll allow them to create the experience in the classroom. So please, as you think about that, as you go forward, think of that. And I leave you with this, the power of perception. I want you to think about students. I want you to think about the story I'm about to tell you. Years ago, Colgate Toothpaste Company wanted to become better. They want to become known. They want to become the best company around. And so they knew that traveling dental floss would be the way to go. So they're like, if we patent and make the best little box, little in the middle, everybody will love us. Everybody will buy our product because it's needed, because they told people, if you're out and you have nasty stuff in your teeth, you need dental floss. So please come get our dental floss, because tomato sauce, and when you go to Italian food, it does not look good if it's all up in your mouth. So please come get it, because spinach is even worse. So come get our dental floss. And what we know is perception kills, and perception changes. And perception creates labels, because guess what? I told you a story about Colgate Toothpaste Company, and I made you look because I primed your thinking of saying, look at where I want you to look at it, was the mouth. But when you start to look back and look around, guess what? You missed something. If you look at that hand, you missed that extra finger, because our mind was focused on one area. It made us look. It made us see only one thing. A story created something to look at rather than seeing the whole big picture. The same time here, this arm does not bend like that. And one last time is there is no ear on the side of his face. And what we know is the teacher's perception of an individual becomes a reality. And to give you just a quick couple examples of what we can do to remove labels, there's 38 now, or 37 now, techniques to really focus on removing the labels off of our students. And we should be focusing on that, because as we look at this, do we know who the individual is? What label are they living under? And how does that label hurt their learning? From special education to what you wear. We have to change the labels that are placed on individuals, especially because of us, the leaders, the teachers, the adults in front of students. We put perceptions on students. Those perceptions become labels. Those labels become reality. And then we teach, act, discipline to the label rather to the human being. I hope that was a good intro to what is removing labels. I'm hoping that I kind of get you sparked up saying, well, I wonder what else is there, because I promise you, I'm working in school now. I'm hearing my students in the hallways. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to continuously try to do my best to do this for my own students in my own school. So I appreciate you having me here. I'm going to say this morning, but I think it's your afternoon.
Thank you, Dominique. We appreciate your presentation today. I appreciate the stories, especially. It was very entertaining and a lot of good facts and information about others. I really enjoyed the report card critiques that you provided and what was shared about other people who definitely overcame the barriers that were placed in front of them. So nice job. Thank you. The good news is we do have a winner of Dominique's book. So for those who attended, thank you. The winner is Cynthia Curtis. So kudos to you. Cynthia, will you go ahead and just email me your mailing address of where you would like us to send the book, and we will drop that in the mail this afternoon. Also, if you could go ahead and complete an evaluation for us, I will put the link in the chat box for you to click and kind of let us know what your thoughts are on today's session. We are always looking to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all the educators across the state. So please go ahead and fill that out for us. Let us know what we're doing well and how we can improve. Also, we just want to, again, thank Dominique and Cynthia. We will get your book. And if you have any other questions or concerns, Dominique said you could reach out to him, or feel free to reach out to the Indiana IEP Resource Center. Thank you so much for your participation today, and have a good one.